to Focus on Parliament on Civic Space TV, brought to you by the Center for Constitutional Governance. I am Isaac Kwagala, your host. Is the Ugandan taxpayer getting a road deal from the government's unprincipled approach to public investment in private business enterprises? Well, on today's edition of Focus on Parliament, we discuss the challenges facing this strategy and how they can be overcome. I am now joined by a panel of distinguished personalities who are with me in studio to help us dissect this topic. Let me introduce them, beginning from my extreme left. Is Dr. Tolit Charles Ayita. Dr. Tolit is a political economy researcher and a governance specialist. Dr. Tolit is also the Associate Director at the Center for Constitutional Governance. It's a pleasure to have you, Doctor, on the program. Say hello to the viewers.
Yeah, thank you very much, Isaac. Pleasure to be here again this morning in, of course, impeccable company. So I hope it will be great deliberations here today.
Many thanks indeed, Doctor. Next to Doctor is Mr. Timothy Chemonges. Mr. Chemonges is the Executive Director at the Center for Policy Analysis and the Parliament Watch. It's a pleasure to have you, Timothy. Say hello to the viewers.
Thank you, Isaac. I'm glad to be here and looking forward to this very fruitful discussion. Thank you.
It's always a pleasure. And of course, the Honorable Salamu Musumba, who is a distinguished national leader and a veteran politician. Honorable, it's a pleasure to have you in the program. Say hello to the viewers.
Yes, thank you very much. It's good to be here to discuss wealth and disempowerment of the people of Uganda through policy, worked policy.
Wow, it's quite grim but interesting. I hope you also recommend the solutions.
Oh yes, I do, because I've been at the heart of the discussions about sugar policy. We have a coffee marketing board that was disbanded, and I was present as we debated the disbanding of UEB, Uganda Electricity Board. And we won this country, and I'm glad to be alive to see the incompetence, the impotence, and the destruction of our economy, of our assets that we should have known better how to keep.
Can't wait to hear from you, Honorable. Many thanks for joining us. And of course, last but not least, is a mainstay on the program, the esteemed eminent Professor Ndebesa, who is a historian and a renowned political commentator. Prof, it's a pleasure to have you on the program. Say hello to the viewers.
I'm glad to be here, and glad to be here with fellow panelists and the viewers, fellow citizens and others. And we should discuss these issues as citizens, but not subjects. So I hope these conversations will shift us from, all of us, from being mere subjects to citizens, so that we can equally participate and not be participated in national issues.
Many thanks indeed, Prof. For context, over the years, the NRM government has made substantial investment in private businesses, casting doubt over its commitment to uphold principles of fiscal policy, but also the efficient use of public resources. Dr. Tolit, let me ask you to get us started. With the Umeme saga, the genesis of Umeme as a power distributor in the country was quite traumatic and also controversial. So is now the impending exit. What is it with Umeme?
Yeah, thank you, Isaac. I think to start this discussion from the point of Umeme would lose a lot of context to the issue. I think it would be inevitable that we just have a brief background, because this discussion invariably is not just Umeme, but it is what you'd look at as a crisis in policy choices in this country, a crisis of direction in governance, a crisis of a struggling establishment that is actually fast losing legitimacy with its people. This whole Umeme story is capped within the overall story of privatization. We know that this country got into the privatization exercise in earnest in the early 90s. The justification at that time was to fit within the global argument around what we were now looking at as future economies, moving away from the Keynesian economics of demand supply. You know that when you look at history of development, particularly in sovereign states, you have the economies of the 60s, you have the economies of the 70s and early 80s, which were largely known to be divided in a dichotomy. Either they leaned socialist or they leaned capitalist. In between, the socialist economy sort of transited to what you'd call mixed economy, which was attuned to the thoughts of people like Marx and all that. So, and then the pure capitalist. What happens is that in Uganda's economic history, or industry, so to speak, the 60s and early 70s is defined as a time when we've had fairly sound economies. And of course, the indicators largely was the measure of GDP, which then would also show you the status or level of living of the people. And that you need to look at it in also within the broad context of the population we had at the time. Very quickly, as the bipolar developments in the bipolar world, continued to manifest, pushing us to the era of neocolonialism, so to speak. Countries decided, especially countries that were socialist in nature or held to mixed economies, tended to begin to embrace capitalism in a way. And that is how we get into the whole thing of privatization. Now, in our context, the whole thing was that, is it still necessary to have government to do business? Because the characteristics at that time, just before privatization, was that government, especially in the productive and processing economies, where you had cotton as cash crops, you had coffee, then you'd have the primary producers form themselves in cooperatives and all that. And then towards the apex, you have a government body. We had something like lint marketing board, coffee marketing board, So government was actually produced. So government was doing business. The capitalist thinking, especially the discussions around the challenges of the Keynesian economics, was that there was a need for government to move out of business, so that we tend towards the arguments of what they're calling a perfect market, you move away from controlled market to a perfect market, which is self-regulatory. That if factors of supply dictate to demand, then demand falls in a certain direction without the regulator, say, put a cap. Because those days, the government would wake up in the morning and say, coffee will sell at this price. Cotton will sell at that price. So that was an imperfect market. That was the argument. And then, of course, there were also nuances of human impact. You know, issues of corruption started rearing their head. Issues of bureaucracy, which involved ethics and all that. International relations, you know. So the argument was that let businesses be self-regulating. Government get out of business. The question which was not answered was, if we are getting out, how far are we getting out? And are we actually getting out? What we have had presented to us is that nominally, on paper, in policy, government sort of pulled out. But government's underhand remained in businesses. So, the case of Umeme, just like many other institutions, government parastatals at the time, they decided, because it was one band, it was one entity. It was Uganda Electricity Board. It generated, it transported, distributed, it sold. So they were like, this does not augur well. I have not yet had the opportunity to look at the business case. I'm really hoping that a business case was done. A study was done, a rationale, but it was the fashion. So we went into what they called unbanding. So the company was unbanded. You know, the law was amended, and then we ended up with the creatures we have today. That is generation, distribution, regulation, transmission. Now, yes. Now, if you looked at this in terms of political economy, if you profiled it in terms of political economy lens, you know, it simply takes you back, you know, to the popular political science adage. Just when you think things are really different is when they actually remain the same. Because with this disbanding, one of the key calculations or objectives of the economics was that you have a linear body that is easier to manage and therefore more efficient. Because in the other one, they were arguing about bureaucracy, you know. But with all these bodies, you find that actually, if anybody did a population census at that time, these now, and probably the services, and you may be subjected it to a cost efficiency calculation, you'd find that we ended up with a body that is far bigger, obese, much more bureaucratic, and so it brings me back to this whole thing of, and this central question, just at what stage can this country achieve what you'd call efficiency in its various sectoral policies? You know, we are passing a lot of policies with the view to get efficient. But when you subject them to a prism of congeality and ask, are they communicating? Are they converging? You know, with a number of different tests. Because you see, like Umeme, for instance, or not even Umeme, let us just look at production of electricity, or electricity as a key factor of production. Because to look at electricity holistically, you will need to look at the production and processing. You need to look at industry. So that means anybody in the Ministry of Energy should be constantly speaking to people in agriculture, should be constantly speaking to people in trade, should constantly be speaking to people in all these other sectors that in water, because today with climate change. But in real essence, there are a number of studies that show that all these agencies are working in silos. Nobody is speaking to the other. So invariably, when you get to our case study, Umeme, and what has been attributed to it as its failures, and therefore today calling for its ejection, you clearly see that yes, Umeme could have had its own inefficiencies, but largely there is an underlying failure that needs to be interrogated. And that underlying failure is a failure of policy implementation in this country, which is basically a governance issue.
Thank you, Doctor, for that background. Honorable, you have been a towering witness to this entire saga from its genesis up to a point where there is now huge clamor from the public and even the government to have the 20-year concession contract of Umeme terminated. But this is without a steep cost to the taxpayer, because at the present, Umeme is demanding 700 billion to compensate it for in terms of the provision of the contract that it signed with the government. But also the government is seeking 2 trillion to capitalize the new entity that will replace the outgoing Umeme entity. What is your analysis of this situation? Are you satisfied in the first place with the performance of Umeme?
Before I get there, I think this is a classic repeat of Uganda Commercial Bank. And the way it was sold and stolen from us. And the thieves are walking on the streets, stealing government. What happened in Uganda Commercial Bank is that we capitalized the bank $70 million before selling it. And they said we were preparing it to be good for sale. They sold technology, they sold systems for a song. And so it's a replay in the Umeme case. We should be able to understand the rationale, the purpose for which we disbanded Uganda Electricity Board and created 7 entities out of that, which Professor has described. And then we got a concession and created Umeme and invited ESCOM, the way even ESCOM was identified is questionable, because they walked down to South Africa and did a deal with the people, because they said UEB was a government enterprise, and the equivalent of UEB was ESCOM in South Africa, and ESCOM was failing at that time, but ESCOM was good to come to Uganda. I do recall there was a big debate of who would head ESCOM, who would head Umeme. And there was the late Chemonges, very versatile, very ready, very capable. I think among the human resource we had at that time, he was the best. But he was coming from UPC, and therefore NRM could have him. And so they brought him
add that actually he did the interview and passed it as number 1.
Yes.
But he was not allowed.
He wasn't allowed. And they brought in a South African Boer paid themselves the highest amount of money, which they externalized. They did deals with ESCOM, insider trading. They cheated us. They robbed us. You should look at the terms of the concession. They were supposed to bring in new technology, new knowledge, new many things. And the most they brought in was technology of vehicle.
Innovation.
Okay? That was the innovation. And of course, they did deals with China, because China would have provided us with at a lower rate. And actually, after the concession, why the concession was allowed to collapse, because the insiders believed that now they know the technology. They can do it themselves without getting a middleman. I remember being at a conference in China, Beijing, and I was watching. So what we have today is a robbery in our midst. Because what are we compensating for? This was a going concern. This was a going concern. Some guy wants the 700 billion for themselves. And I'm also reminded about the 1979 war, the compensation. They used exactly the same pattern to rob us. They initiated something with some thieves in Tanzania and said that we must make war reparations, and so they came back to us. That we were paying for the 1979 war. They stole that. And so they are back at the stealing table, and that's why they need the crime scene to be Parliament, because Parliament has become a crime scene. It passes all these things, and we should hold them accountable for what they're doing to the country, ripping us off. So you take the 700 billion for a going concern. Umeme has been making money on a daily basis. Umeme has declared all their things, and they've been paying because it was a business concession. Now, as if that's not enough, they need another 2 trillion. In the same manner that they did to UCB, they need the 2 trillion to do what?
To capitalize a new entity that would replace Umeme.
It is a big, big theft. There's a word called a haste, which I don't know how to pronounce. But that is what it is. Whatever it is, I just failed to pronounce that one. And so, we are looking at robbers in the face. Robbers. Broad daylight robbers in the face. And what they're doing now is to use Umeme and that concession. They need to unpack the entire thing. If we had members of parliament with capacity, they would help this country to unpack. If we had an auditor general of any substance, they would help us to unpack what is going on. But they can't, because it is a tool of oppression. This government uses corruption as a weapon. They allow certain tribes, certain people to steal officially and dominate others. It is not just a simple Umeme thing you're seeing. It's not. And this pattern, you can trace it in those things that they have.
Yeah, the whole divestiture.
They have
the divestiture of the economy.
The economy is a pattern. It's a pattern that they've used against the people of Uganda, and I think we should ask the speakers of the parliament, what is the basis of the things they're doing? I was a chair of Presidential Foreign Affairs Committee, and cabinet is part of the things that I was looking at. In that, cabinet only meets in cabinet. That's why there's no communication, there's no coordination. They have limited it to a meeting In the constitutional terms, there's no executive, because the executive does not even have a cabinet library. They do not even a cabinet. They don't have a cabinet resource center to put their brains together outside the different ministries. They only meet on that Monday morning, and everybody brings a paper, and that paper is personal to holder. You shouldn't even comment about it. Why are you entering my deals? This country is sick.
Thank
Very
you, Honorable, for your observations.
Because you see, we are being managed by bush politics and bushmen. The bush is now, for all of you to see, the bush is in cabinet, the bush is in parliament, you know, the bush is in the judiciary, the bush has invaded us all. There's nobody thinking, there's nobody planning. You just look at the NDP, National Development Plan. Does it even speak to the things that concern us, lay people, citizens? They don't even have the tools of analysis, do they? They don't even have long
Log frames, long frames.
They don't have log frames. They don't even have a dashboard. You know, by now they should have developed a dashboard in which you can see, as you, Office of the Prime Minister, monitoring your government, you should be able to see where has the money gone. The technology available to us, if you can look at the way they monitor elections in America, the way they monitor climate and weather, this capability is available. Only that the Bushmen know not. And they are all over us. They can't manage a modern society. They are incapable. Not even their children can. Because they are not exposed. They talk from a point of privilege. They know nothing. So, the governance issue is at the heart of what we are describing. And Umeme is nothing else but a hist.
Timothy, from a policy standpoint, what is the debacle with Umeme? Was it a deal poorly negotiated? Is it the failure of government, specifically the institution of parliament, to oversight the negotiation and the resultant implementation of that entity and its operations? Or is it a failure of regulation?
Thank you. I think that has already been partly responded to by the submission of Charles and Honorable here. It's a mixture of that, but at the core is the question of governance, is the proper oversight and ensuring that things are done as they should be. Again, when you look at the operations around the silo execution and the silo implementation of all these things, and having a section of individuals, you know, operating and looking at most of these deals as their deals and trying to push them in their direction. And sometimes you find that there is poor coordination, well designed to fit into a certain design of specific individuals. For Umeme, you will see that the figure, the 700 billion money that has been highlighted, you've seen figures moving, and it's not just the 700. Others are citing, you know, different figures, and ministry has highlighted that there is no, because they are already ongoing operations. Sometimes there are figures that, you know, are not clearly envisaged. This is a process that we started a couple of years back, 5 years or so, that there should have been a very clear plan in terms of what is being projected and even anticipation of some of those resources. And so when we get closer, you know, to the end of the whole arrangement and there is no clear figure, it speaks to the fact that I think there is a fundamental problem on the question of management. There's a fundamental problem in terms of managing the interest of the different players, but also looking at the question of the preparedness of most of these agencies. We are waiting to see what it looks like even as we move forward. But fundamentally, I think that the question of oversight for most of these institutions, while indeed they have the mandate, you find that the actual power to actually exercise that mandate is not there. You know, we have a parliament that has been predominantly described as the lame duck, institution. They have the mandate, but they can hardly, provide a clear oversight. They can hardly provide the clear direction. And for most of these things, they're happening on the watch of these individuals. We have a fundamental problem when it comes to the governance of the country. And when you, again, looking at the other examples that have been highlighted, this is just one of the biggest challenges, some of the challenges that we are facing, looking at it from the governance perspective. We have problems that are happening, and as we shall be discussing on coffee, there are challenges in some of these models that are being implemented in the country, and most of those. Speaking at the heart of all those, we find that there is a problem in terms of how the governance system has been structured, right from the top to the oversight systems, and the institutional capacity have all been disabled. What that means is that most of them now operate at the interest of whoever is managing those. So, Isaac, I think that when we look at the issue of Umeme and their exit and the capacity of UECDL, I think while we ought to be a bit optimistic, looking at all the surrounding issues on this matter, you find that there is a fundamental problem that we are headed to, given the governance systems, the institutions that are charged and should be, providing the oversight of this.
Thank you, Timothy, for your comments. Professor, there seems to be overwhelming consensus from all the pre-current speakers that at the root of this issue is the question of governance. Do you agree with that assessment? But also, we are now talking about the process of transiting from Umeme, which is a private enterprise distributing power to the end user, the citizen, to a new entity, which is envisaged to be owned wholly by the government. Will this work?
Thank you for the question. I think part of the problem of poor policy governance in Uganda is because we have got new wine in old bottles. There is this concept of rationalization. I think after 1980s, which Dr. Tolit talked about, there was a policy prescription by the World Bank after the Bag report. Bag was the chairman of that report, Accelerated Development in Africa, something like that, which advised about privatization of public enterprises. And so NRM fits into that Bag report prescription of privatization. However, why I'm saying new wine in old bottles is the NRM government, the Bush people, as Ndugu here talked about, is that their mindset, we are talking about mindset these days, their mindset is controlist, is monolithic, is Marxist. By the way, this borrowing of issues of policies and ideas from Europe and applying them here wrongly is part of the problem. So you have this Marxist mindset, the old wine borrowed from Europe and applied here wrongly, but even rightly, I don't see how rightly it is, because some countries like Soviet Union, even China, even Vietnam, have shifted away from that mindset. So the challenge we have of policy governance here is that we need to rethink, but we can only rethink if we allow participation. These good governance policy frameworks of participation, transparency, accountability, responsibility, and etc. are not applicable in this whole notion of privatization and liberalization. Let me give the example of China. China under Mao got stuck somewhere and it could not develop, and actually very many people were dying in China until Mao died. So when Mao died, he had started something called the Cultural Revolution. But it was not working. So when he died, was it in 1976 or thereabout? There was a group which wanted to pursue his policies, which others had seen as not workable. The Gang of Four. So the people who took over from Mao, Chairman Mao Zedong, actually eliminated those Gang of Four, including his wife, in order to pave way to open.
Eliminating means what?
Oh, they were arrested, others were killed, others were imprisoned until they died in prison. And so they replaced that system that had clogged further development in China. That's how China has managed to pass through. So that you make sure that you have new wine in new bottles and not remain in the zigzag that we have remained in. So there is a challenge of policy governance, where we have new old wine of a certain old attitude of governance that is not participatory, that still thinks in the correct line business. President Museveni has admitted publicly that he was wrong on privatization of UCB. And those who were opposed to it, like Suruma, were right. You remember Suruma when he was minister and he was actually dismissed from the post of minister. He had been declared actually the best African finance minister about 2 weeks back. But he was done away with. And the president has accepted that actually Suruma was right and the president was wrong. So what does that lesson tell us? What lesson do we learn from that?
Before you tell us the lesson, Professor, to volunteer some information.
Yes.
The president has also previously said that on the Umeme concession issue, he was misled by certain individuals in his government.
You know, also to tell you to just between this China thing, policy transition, even Ujama and Mwalimu gave way to new thinking.
And Mwalimu admitted that it
admitted.
was wrong.
Yeah.
Let those new presidents now effect a new direction.
Correct.
So it seems we are at that crossroad where we need a new direction. So this policy crisis that we do have about Umeme, now coming to Umeme, it was a privatization without clear discussion to see how Umeme would run. And I am seeing it in other enterprises. Maybe we are going to discuss them again. You see, we are like a pendulum in Uganda. We move this direction and then this direction, and when it fails, then we move next like this. We have continued like a pendulum,
We swing.
swinging from here to here, from extreme to extreme, and remaining stagnant. So there was need to rethink privatization here, but there was no space for discussing these issues. The people who are running these policies have no clue as to how to run successful enterprises and successful institutions.
But
But they don't allow.
But Professor, you talked about the Marxist thinking and the idea of control as central. The president has always had this tagline of, you see, this happened, that, but you need to be within the correct line.
Yes.
So you first make reference. What is this correct line? Is that the pendulum which goes this way and never finds the center?
You see, the correct line here is that when the pendulum goes here, that is the correct line. Then it comes back without reflecting, and it is again a correct line. Now a correct line. Now we don't know.
It's a moving target.
It's a moving target. So we have really a big challenge of people who have no clue as to how to run these enterprises, but two, who do not allow exchange of ideas and to learn and to learn and relearn. Like when we are here now, we are learning, and we don't come here to say I have the correct line. No, we can learn and from each other and improve, but the government has refused to learn. They have this policy of identification of cadres and placement of cadres. And identification of cadres, a cadre is somebody who is loyal to the head of state. Instead of identification of talent or identification of those people who have got a national common good interest, they are identifying those who are loyal. And in that process, that's where we have policy implementation going wrong. And there is a common saying which captures a narrative, which captures this one, but good policies are made in Uganda, they are perfected in Kenya and implemented in Rwanda. What is it capturing? It is capturing that we have policy governors who have no clue as to how to run policies. She was talking about having a dashboard. Which dashboard now? These things, these policies are supposed to be coordinated in the ministry, in the Prime Minister's office. But the Prime Minister is always running around. She's now in Chikube, I don't know where. She's just in the field running, campaigning in Kawempe, you know. Not sitting down to synthesize and sieve out policies and how policies can be run and look at the risks and go forward. So rationalization now, like this rationalization of other enterprises, including that one, was conceived by Salim Saleh and then sold to the government, and the government starts implementing. But who did a policy review of these challenges?
Policy study.
Policy study. No. There are very many people here who can do that policy study, but because of that correct line and entitlement and perceiving other people to be ignorant and perceiving other people not to be patriotic. You know, who is a patriot now in this country? You know, a patriot loves his country and the people. Now you are bashing people in Kawempe and you think you are a patriot. So the challenge now we have, in my understanding of these public enterprises, yes, there can be public enterprises. We can still have public enterprises. But I'm meant to understand, I can be corrected from my neighbor here who has been in government, is that there is a whole institution called UDC, Uganda Development Corporation. That is the investment arm of the state, of government. So these enterprises, the money should be put, we could have a budget and appropriating this budget of say 2 trillion, we'll put it in UDC, and UDC now knows how to distribute these enterprises under the watchful eye of the Auditor General. There would be the Auditor General, there would be Public Accounts Committee, there would be other institutions to audit this money. But now you wake up and you say we are dealing away with this enterprise, we are dealing away with Umeme by 30th of March. March is coming, you haven't even got the money, you don't know even how much it is, because others are saying 700 billion. But then the company that is supposed to take over Umeme, the government company, is talking about 2 trillion. So we don't know which is which. Where are we going to get the 2 trillion?
700 is for compensation.
The Uganda
is going to take over.
Electricity something.
It's the Uganda Electricity Distribution Company.
Yeah, limited.
Yeah, limited.
Like
that is taking it, but it has always been up.
Do they have, because if it's distribution, do they have the capability?
No, actually, you see, that's the point I was making. That's classic political science. When things, the argument between form and substance. When things are just looking different, that is when they are actually the same. Because now the argument that the Uganda Distribution Company Limited is making, or the justification for taking over the business, is that they're saying, by the way, before the disbandment, government did this business. And no, that's the most important point we need to know, that Uganda Distribution, UDC, is actually a government entity. It's part of the 4 key bundles. So for them, they are saying, this is not new. We have done this before. So we are only taking back what was ours.
It's the pendulum now.
And the pendulum,
Yeah,
and they are now saying that they are saying they've got the correct line, because they are saying that there is nothing wrong. I had I think Ofono Pondo make that argument. It was saying, what is wrong with reaching a point and deciding that anyway, I was wrong over that decision. I have now gone back to the correct one.
But you see, the missing point there is that they disbanded human resource.
Yeah.
And that disbanded human resource has not even been paid for the last 20 years. They've been dumped into the poverty trap of professionals. It also reminds me of that government program, what did they call it? The one where
the streamlining of the public service.
The public service. There was a buzzword for it.
The rationalization?
No, the retrenchment.
The retrenchment.
Yes.
It's back to retrenchment.
Yes.
You know, failure upon failure. Now they were retrenching the northerners because they were the ones holding posts then. Now they are retrenching these ones, and who will fit in? But the capability and the capacity built and eroded over time is a loss to the nation.
And let me bring in, even as I conclude this one, another issue that they have not looked at. I saw the minister Nanka being asked, and she had no clue. She got lost. You see, Umeme has been put on the stock exchange, and there are very many people who have put their money. You are now disbanding the Umeme. Where would the capital of these citizens go? The shareholders, how are they going to be paid? Nobody had thought about it. They had no clue until Nankaruga was asked, and she had nothing to answer. She simply said, oh, but these citizens who had put their money there had not contacted me. Come on.
No,
the minister should have that.
Isaac, let me just chip in. By the way, I'm a certified stockbroker. I was trained by government of Uganda in 1996, 1997, when they were envisaging the coming of the stock exchange. However, I have not even had much opportunity to do any practice, because we waited for the stock exchange until 1999 when I left this country, and 2000 when I left. Now, you see what is interesting is public divestiture, what it simply means is the buzzword is that you are now going to what they call the borrower of last resort. The borrower of last resort. And the borrower of last resort is believed to be the public. Because a company reaches a point where there are three key things it now must meet. One is that it's now looking for what you'd call critical capital. And this also takes us back to this argument. Why would government give money to a private entity? If an entity has been audited and has been reporting, profitabilization, and has a board that is believed to be sound, then it should be cleared to go to borrow. Because this is business. We have monies. We are buying TB bills. We are buying all these instruments. We can buy instruments from these viable companies. So why shouldn't government think that, yes, this company has reached a point where it needs capitalization, and the monies from the banks or monies from offshore lenders is expensive money. Let's allow it go borrow to the public. That superstructure is there in this country, So as the Honorable Salamu Musumba is saying correctly, probably it's just a corruption scheme. Why do you keep going why do you keep eyeing public money?
No, the villager in my...
Why?
Is the one paying for these fat cars.
Doctor, before
But
we take it...
let me conclude on this one. There is a very important point I want to make here. Is that these Ugandan citizens who had become shareholders in Umeme are now going to be in a crisis, and the state will have to pay them again. Makerere University used to have its pensions in the National Insurance Corporation. When Uganda government divested National Insurance Corporation and sold it to a Nigerian, Makerere staff said, no, we are not going to National Insurance Corporation. National Insurance Corporation Limited of the Nigerian had no capacity to pay back Makerere University. Makerere University staff went on strike. Government had to meet the cost and pay Makerere University staff and not National Insurance Corporation. So when Umeme,
they paid for the Nigerians.
yes, they paid for the Nigerians. So when Umeme flies to South Africa and these Ugandans go on strike, I don't know whichever way, and they threaten not to vote NRM, the government is going to use taxpayers' money to pay the shareholders of Umeme, and taxpayers will again be shortchanged.
Isaac,
Thank you, Professor.
Isaac, if you allow me a minute, I'll give you a story, a very classic story, in a very short. When, as a student then in Makerere, I was a journalist for the New Vision, and I was doing business and investigative writing. I was part of the people who did a lot of the stories of the selling of the former International Conference Center, which is now Serena.
Yes.
Now,
Those,
it was very interesting.
Malaysians.
A group of Malaysians were sourced, almost handpicked, just like the way they did ESCOM. They were brought, they brought them here. They were state guests. And maybe we were also lucky. We used to partake a little bit of the goodies. When we would go to interview these people, would have the privilege, you know, from the student rough posh. I would eat a beautiful meal at Serena.
Logistics.
Yes, but then I went. There was now a bit of internet, so I started researching this company. Then I stumbled over the fact that actually that company, which was here and had concluded a deal with Uganda government, and had even set a date to give the first offshore payment or installment, even cleared by Parliament, I discover that the company was faced with moratorium in Malaysia. Moratorium, that simply means they could not transfer, they couldn't pay foreign money out of Malaysia. So it was another hist. I broke the story. When the story came out, fellows in Ministry of Finance called me. And they're like, are you serious about this? Do you know what you're talking about? Some of them didn't even know what a moratorium was, apart from the fact that they had learned it in their economics classes. The guy who was director of privatization was called Michael Opagi. And with the late Mahanizi. They called me. I met them. They were like, young man, how did you get this? I explained. I showed them the newspapers I had read online. But anyway, we can't go into all the stories. But it is so easy to hoodwink this government.
And I think later they were Tunisians. Or that was Shelton.
No,
The Malaysians.
they were
The Malaysians.
Yes.
Okay.
Focus on Parliament now takes a short break. We'll see you back shortly.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media or to access and use computers, other electronic devices and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Welcome back. You are still watching Focus on Parliament on Civic Space TV. In this segment, we continue scrutinizing government public investment in private business enterprises and its adverse effects on the taxpayer by highlighting the cases of the Inspire Coffee enterprise and also the Atiak Sugar Factory. Let me start with you, Tim. There is now the phenomenon of private business enterprises being beneficiaries of the public purse, monies from the consolidated fund. This week actually, government has disbursed an extra 67 billion to a private enterprise, Inspire Coffee Africa, without any single trace of a binding contract between the government and that enterprise, detailing how the public would benefit from the arrangement. Also, there is the case of the Lubowa Hospital project, which has continued to also take monies from the public coffers, up to a tune of now 700 billion Ugandan shillings.
What is it about 700? Is it because of Museveni? Everything is 7,
Around
7, 7, 7.
It should be the lucky number.
The magic number.
Should
The
be
magic
lucky
number.
The magic number. Tim, is this model sustainable for the government in view of its fiscal priorities?
No, I think definitely the answer is no. Is that it's not feasible, it's not sustainable, but also it serves against the people's interest. Maybe the angle that you are highlighted on whether these entities have become a model in which government is preferring to operate in. The other perspective is that there could be platforms or avenues in which resources are being used to simon resources and to create a sort of a system where money is being channeled through them. When you go on ground and look at what is happening, whether there is work in progress, we've seen Parliament, which is charged with the mandate of providing an oversight, including the Deputy Speaker and the Leader of Opposition. They've been denied access to some of these work that is ongoing. There's a lot of unclarity in light of what's going on. When you look at the amount of money that has so far been put vis-a-vis what we should be getting, you see that there's definitely no clarity. Looking at also the component around the parameters in which we use public resources to support these private entities, is still very unclear. Which provides a leeway to government to use the parameters that serves the interest of the day to support most of these institutions. But I think the overarching perspective would be the rate of return on these investments. When we say that we are going to invest in Atiak, we've invested, I've just been reading here that we've so far invested there close to 668 billion so far since 2020. And
Since COVID.
Since COVID, the amount of money that we've invested there. And that's why earlier I think Charles here was highlighting that there's been a bit of protest on the headline that Daily Monitor published, saying that Atiak is not sweet anymore, saying that there's nothing that is really happening, and so there's a bit of contestation in line. So looking at the resources that we are putting in, looking at the parameters in which we are operating, in putting public money in private these private entities, you see it's very unclear, and the rate of return is not there. And so I think even as you look into this, it's also fair to say that on the lack of transparency, on the lack of clarity in how these resources are being worked on, there is a lot that is not known. There's a lot that is being hidden from the public, and that there is a bigger interest in how the resources are being channeled the public resources are being channeled to these institutions.
Thank you, Timothy. Professor, building on Timothy's submission, most of these arrangements relating to government's investment in private business enterprises are opaque. The public does not have an understanding of the expectation, financial-wise, but the taxpayer continues to meet a very steep cost in capitalizing those enterprises. What could be the challenge?
The challenge is a correct line. The challenge is a correct line. Because, I don't know, maybe because I've not worked in government.
Incorrect line.
In those policies, I have an incorrect line. Because the Uganda government, there used to be Uganda Development Corporation, which I talked about earlier on, which is an investment arm of the government.
It has been brought back. It was also recapitalized.
It was also recapitalized. So, yes, government can have strategic investment in certain strategic sectors for employment, for boosting agriculture, for this and that. But then I would have expected that we do these things formally, not informally. We should not have the informal state. Is it the one they are calling the deep state?
Yeah.
So
The home state.
the government should budget for money to go to the Uganda Development Corporation. And then Uganda Development Corporation can have a memorandum of understanding or an agreement with that private investor in a strategic position. They agree the investor is going to put there how much, government is going to put there how much, the Auditor General will be auditing that company every year, and at a certain point, maybe if this company does wonders, the government can divest itself from it and gets money back. Because now you are talking about, as you have just correctly said, you have public money, taxpayers' money, going to an individual to start an enterprise. As the Uganda says, with the public, where are we profiting from? Because you are giving money to a private enterprise. The private enterprise is not audited. We do not know how much, how that private enterprise will pay back to government. We do not know even whether it is going to succeed or not, because there is no clear study as to how
It has no profile.
how this company is going to work. How much money did that private enterprise have, so that government now becomes comes in under public-private arrangement,
Partnerships, yes.
partnership arrangement. And so the taxpayers' money must also be accounted for. But you don't just simply get money. This is actually abuse of office, abuse of public resources. This is corruption, what I normally call political corruption. You cannot use public resources officially through parliament. And you know our parliament has ceased to be a real parliament that is supposed to audit government. It no longer does that. It simply passes it because they are also expecting to get their share after they have passed that money. Because how on earth do you give out money to private enterprises without anywhere having an agreement as to how the public will have a share? I thought this would be a share. And that share should come through an institutionalized arrangement through Uganda Development Corporation, a public institution for public investment. For heaven's sake, you don't just go to parliament and say, I want 600 billion, I want 400 billion, I want 67 billion, and I'm giving it to a private enterprise. We don't know how viable the enterprise is. We don't, just using emotions. This is an emotional question now.
There are no emotions.
In the
These
public,
are robots.
in the public narrative.
These are robots. There are no
Yeah,
emotions.
but I think
Perhaps there is a motivation to the emotions.
No, they are robots.
That's
Yeah.
what we should
we
do.
don't have rationale, a rationale of running a modern state. In a modern state, you cannot have public resources given to a private enterprise without showing how the public, which paid that money, will benefit directly or indirectly, or what? Directly actually. So the public narrative is to be them feelings. These are feelings. This is not rational. There is, why did we create Uganda Development Corporation then? How do people, private people, now we have the Atiak factory. We don't know whether the person is has got a background of running that business.
By the way, Prof, let me give you interesting information with this the UDC you're talking about. I think last week or the other week, I saw an advertisement in the newspapers where UDC is asking to recruit companies that it would retain and it would support it in doing what you'd call what do they call that in banking or finance? It's more or less like a vetting, yeah, due diligence.
Yeah.
But the inner story is the UDC has already been giving out money. UDC has already given out billions of shillings to would-be identified industrialists or manufacturers.
We have even an industrial plan.
So I'm asking myself, how did they do that then? Now that they're looking for, for a professional firm. So it just tells you the story of how things are done. But and also the inner story is that, by the way, even UDC, if the visionary man has not yet called them to say, Musumba knows what she's doing, you can even come up with a Harvard plan, but nobody will look at it.
So we have a challenge, Mr. Moderator, that there is poor governance of policies. There is poor governance of state resources, how they are given out, how they are distributed, and how they would benefit the general public or the economy in general. So it still goes back to the correct line that we are running a state, a public institution, in an informal way. On the surface, we have the formal legal processes, legal framework, we have a policy framework, we have an institutional framework, but underneath, all these enterprises are run like somebody's plantation, even the plantation that has no owner. In Runyangori, we have a saying, Kabetemere. Kabetemere is a plantation that has no owner. For some reason, the owner died or went to work in Uganda. People used to go to Uganda to work. And anybody can go and harvest. So how do you give out money to this coffee, Inspire Coffee in Ntungamo? And we don't know whether Ntungamo was the right space, place geographically, where to locate that company, to Atiak, to somebody we don't know,
to Lubowa,
to Roko,
to Munyonyo,
to somebody in Baise there, Matuga. So public resources have become Kabetemere. Let anybody who comes and has the right connections go and get billions, by the way, not shillings, billions. If any of us was given a billion today here, you would even fail to get out here from this room because you don't know how to go with a billion. And you are talking about 600 billion.
I know how
it
to
is
go out
900.
with it.
I would start quaking.
I know.
So please, the general public, I don't know why we are talking here. Last time I talked about wacha waseme watachoka, whether we are just talking until further notice, or whether we, the elites who are talking, who understand, who have a clue as how a modern state should be run, how we should be. I think if we don't, we are doomed.
Thank you, Professor, for your reflections. Doctor, early on the program, Honorable made a pledge to propose a few recommendations on how to correct this situation. But I want to ask you to get us started on that note.
To hazard a solution.
Corrective measures, because now all these enterprises, they have a notorious record and history of unprofitability. They haven't made a cent.
No, some
But
don't
you're
have
in-
even a record.
You're out, recapitalize, we injecting
You're missing the
more money.
point. They are designed to fail. They are designed to fail. They are designed
Fail the public
to
and profit the
pick the
individuals.
money. That's the design.
Mm.
Yeah. So don't say they are failing. They are meeting the design. If, for instance, you went back to audit Apex funds, the Apex funds, and the schools that people benefited, the hotels that people benefited, did they pay back? Because the model of a parish model, the parish model is built on the Apex model. Apex funds were received through Bank of Uganda. They were accessed by the big people, and they were never paid back. And the pendulum side of it is PDM. They've taken the Apex funds as PDM to the community, and they want the community to pay. The community won't pay.
Yes, doctor.
Yeah, we looking at recommendations is certainly a good way to wrap up a conversation like this one. What I do know is that, for instance, to get to recommendations, you also need a pathway. You know, we who do scholarly work, before you reach a conclusion, you need to demonstrate to us your discussion, and then we can see where you are deriving your conclusions from. And I think this applies to also this conversation we are having. So before I hazard any conclusion, I just want to take on three things, three characteristics within our economy, our economic outlook. And probably from that, I can pick some recommendations. One is, Isaac, I do not know whether the rest of Ugandans actually follow the trends within our economy. It is interesting. For instance, I will cite I'll cite a World Bank. I will cite the World Bank status reports that it makes annually. Then I will also look at a study that Oxfam International did, Oxfam International and Oxfam Uganda, I think about 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, on the Ugandan economy. And then I will also look at a report by an economic watchdog called Poor and Poor. All these three reports indicate one thing clearly, that this Ugandan economy was viable up to about 2012. After 2012, we have gone into a situation, an economic situation called retardation. The grinding wheels of this economy are now beginning to clatter and may actually come to a complete halt. I do not know how much Ugandans know about this. So the question for me then would be the central question of the day. What is that we did before 2012 that we are not doing now? And what is it that we are doing now that is not aligned to what we did? So the recommendation for me there is that it is certainly time that we need to take stock of our proposed economic models, the economic trajectory. Why? Because you see, you cannot continue churning out solutions. You know, if you see between 2012 and today, I don't know how many economic prescriptions we have. And these keep going to Parliament, because our focus here is Parliament. They keep going through that house. No, so I keep asking. You know, the other day I was intrigued. For once, I was really elated. I'm telling you, I was so excited when I saw the Speaker of Parliament interject into the submission of the government, the Minister of Information, and when they were discussing the Equal Opportunities Report, and was like, well, you know, it's only that I am conscripted, but I'm interested in this debate. You know, you can't go that way. And volunteered information and reminded the man, look, I am actually the chairman of the appointments committee. But the kind of names that are coming here and the kind of people who are, I come from TESO, and I'm wondering whether TESO belongs to this country. So the fact that, you know, this is, you know, in political science, they call it an implosion, a possible implosion. So when you begin to see the roof, the ceiling beginning to leak and begin to draw inwards, and you are insisting this ceiling will not fall, I think there will be a problem. That is one. The other is this. You see, you cannot insist, especially economics is a science, finance is a science. When I read the reports of Poor and Poor, and then the World Bank, they are warning. For instance, there's what they call the reservist capacity. This country, God forbid, if those wheels grounded to a halt, and this has happened. We saw the 2007 financial crisis in the USA, you know, as orchestrated by the David brothers. We've seen the financial crisis later, 2003, in Europe. If that, God forbid, if that ever happened, our reservist capacity is a mere 3 months. 3 months. That if we went to a situation where we are not making out any money tomorrow, in 3 months, we are all declared candidates for humanitarian assistance.
But what's driving that situation, Doctor?
When I look at people driving these big cars, these swipe cars, and we are all Ugandan, and this is our context. Some people think, you know, the people who are churning up to 700 billion, 600 billion, we are all caught up in the same circumstance. This economy is not viable, you know, so to speak. So let nobody pretend that there is some money somewhere that we have.
Oil for next year.
Oil, that don't even tell me about that oil story. One day I'll tell you about oil. Because this oil is done. Actually, let me mention it now. If Ugandans don't know, the business of oil is called frontal business. Actual oil money is made at time of speculation. Because an enterprise like oil, gas, how viable can it be for a country? Because as you know, I like the professor's inference to wananchi, muntu wa wansi. How do we benefit from it? The only thing that we can benefit from it is probably the jobs. Yeah, so you find that the oil business, because of the way it is structured, since it is frontal, the actual money is made at the time of, you know, of discovering the wells, because it is speculative. The people who do the actual trade are the investors who put money in the promise that oil has been found and the prospects in it. So you find that it's very much an offshore business. Once that has been done, and to manifest that, or you know, to give clarity to that, you saw what happened. We had the Talo, you had the Total, you had I don't know who. There was a lot of jostling. People did not understand why. The money was being made at that time. And that money has been made.
Through stock exchanges.
It's true, yes. It's a very elaborate and complex financial market. So once these people are now gone, and they are gone with the money, what now we are left with is the burden. That is why the arrangement you have now is what they call the pro rata basis payment. The guy who is putting in money, for every liter he gets out of the soil, he almost takes out 70%. And that brings me actually to my third point. Do we have the requisite capacity, to audit, monitor our economy? Because most of the money that we are losing, we have a law that, by the way, that needs to be revisited. The financial law we are having allows for reckless repatriation. Most of the money, because as we speak, I think for every $1 Uganda makes, for every $1, I think we what would you call it? The 80% of 1 shilling is what?
That's 3/4.
Yeah, almost 3/4 is already expended. Either it is the debt or it is the operational cost, So for every dollar we receive, we only retain 2/3. Yeah. So that means we actually, in terms of what you'd call foreign earning equity, we are non-viable, and that explains why our debt goes higher and higher. Now, the Oxfam report I was relating to, also through an empirical study, showed that we have what you call an unorthodox economy. Now, unorthodox in the sense that they draw a pyramid. It's pyramidal. Now, ours, because a triangle has a base, then you have the tip. Now, ours is upside down. Our economy stands on the tip. So maybe the professor's pendulum also applies. So because it's on the tip, and there are many reasons, but the very simple reasons, 2 or 3, are that what is the working force? I mean, yes, those in the earning bracket are very few here, at the tip. Then we have the middle, which is more filled with the agriculturalists, whose contribution to the GDP is also very low. And then, that's why we begin to say that sometimes you need a study. Because if you are getting money, if Oxfam is saying that our most viable business enterprises are within the service sector, and the service sector means we're talking about telephone, banks. Now, if you ask yourself, yes, yeah, so if you ask yourself, who are the owners?
And the aqueous economy.
Yes.
Mineral water.
Yes.
Soda.
So who? Who are the owners? Where the profits, where do they go? And then you have this large base who are largely young people, and are not earning. So if we had a focused economy with a clear, actionable plan, we would now be, our biggest thought would be around a knowledge economy. We would be thinking of empowering these young people with knowledge within the contexts of global economy trends, and which are pointing towards ICT, what they call the blue chip economy. But look at our primary school syllabus. For instance, today AI has come at the center stage of life. Look at our primary school, primordial school. Where is ICT? In Uganda, up to today, up to now, if you took a walk in Kampala and asked yourself, is there any ICT, serious IT hub? Where is it? Children who are going to school in Gulu University, Kabale, are interacting with a laptop first year in the university in the 21st century. How can that economy be competitive? How can it be viable? how can it be world class? These are the questions we should be asking. So, in conclusion, we are prepared to a very dangerous course. And I am tempted to borrow Professor Ndebesa's thinking that to continue to have old wine in a new bottle is not viable. And we now need to begin to ask the hard questions. If this bottle needs cracking, then let us either throw it on the wall, it breaks, and we start reconstructing, or if it means throwing it wholesome away, we have Lake Victoria, we can throw it.
Interesting perspective by Dr. Tolit. Honorable,
Yes.
should we throw the bottle because doctor describes a situation where our economic model is inverted? How do we come out of this situation? Of course, respecting the topic of the day.
Well, what we have that we are describing as a government is really a fake thing. It's just a fake. There's no government. It is in the normal sense of the word. If it was a government, there would be no such distortion. I was being told a story that in 1986, these Bushmen didn't know how to run anything. So they invited Tanzania to help out with structuring a government. And this is a Tanzania that was coming out of Ujamaa. So what they have structured has not been updated to meet the times and the challenges we have. That's why you see the trial and error that they go through. Today they are consolidating. The next time they are disbanding. They are creating MDIs. They are creating agencies. They are disbanding agencies. It's just total chaos at the table. What we need to do, there was a time when they were looking at Malaysia as a government model to copy. But remember that also Malaysia fell through at some point.
Yeah, the tiger economies
The
collapsed.
tiger economies did collapse. And so to update the software and the hardware of governance needs us to think multi-generational. So we need in place multi-generational concoction that will bring different benefits from the different generations. You have the professors here, you have the new age, you have him, you have the young people that are technology savvy but without content,
Where
without
should we
any
situate
understanding.
that concoction?
In
governance?
structuring a new government. And that new government, the government, a real government, not this distortion, so that we upgrade, we look at a model of a government that we want to emulate and look out for what it takes to build that infrastructure of governance. If you asked me, we were doing well with the local government before we re-centralized it. If we had empowered it the way Kenya has fallen into the trap of corruption. But that template was good. And I would propose that any future government should have a sharing code, 50-50, 50-50 of the national resources. And so we need also to relearn. Much as we are going to unlearn, we need to relearn and know the building blocks of a government. The building blocks of a government are not an individual. It's a team. It's like you're preparing for World Cup. And you must generate a winning team. Not this patchwork we see of Balam and others. The new wine in old bottles and old bottles in with the new wine. That there's a big mismatch. When you hear the things that
I've seen a new school, very beautiful in Jinja.
Yeah.
With a big signage, the Public Service Institute.
Public services.
I don't know who goes there.
There's no content. It's just
No,
Is it-
government is now taking
Is it-
people there.
Is it time for Balaam to go there?
Previously, public servants
was
would
UMI.
go to UMI.
it was UMI.
But when UMI became so intellectual academic, they said let them create one
They
which
are
will
the
teach
ones that
skills.
stand. I used to teach at UMI.
Yeah.
It is this government that changed the model.
Yeah.
It didn't want any knowledgeable civil servant. That's why they pick anything and everything and throw there. And so you just walk to the Ministry of Finance and just look at the sitting arrangements, the old desks in a new building, you know. I mean, it's just tasteless, totally tasteless. So what I would propose really is that the guys that want governance, they should transfer what they have put in their homes to government. You go to any minister's home and see the furniture. Look at the ambience. If they transfer that ambience they love for themselves at home to government, we would have a beautiful service delivery system. We know what to do, but we have the wrong people in the wrong places. And so we need also to deploy our human resource, our knowledge base, our expertise appropriately and following from
Identifying cadres.
no cadres won't make it.
Cadre
But cadres,
identification.
the cadres,
Not
And
talent.
employment.
no.
Not talent.
And you know we are also stuck at the individual merit level. And what constitutes merit to a government is loyalty. That one is not ours. No, we must fight that one. So they deploy a lot of energy in that. I wanted to tell you a story of a mole. I think it's a mole, where they found oil. If you were to look at district local governments, I would want to interest the public to look at a mole. A mole has been designed by experts that are interested in oil in a mole. And the things you find in a mole, the planning, the designing, the physical planning, and the training and preparedness, the people of a mole think it's a big thing. And it should be. Only that the model is a plantation basis. You remember the plantations of the sugar plantations in South America, reserving places and classing people and clustering them. And the people there, the leaders don't know what is being planned for them because those plans are not generated by themselves. They are imposed on them. And what is the attraction? It's a tiak, and it's also the oil. And so this is a community that is being set up for destruction and for devouring, and they don't know. They do it with such a glee. I was in Amora, I was so frightened because coming from Kamuli, nobody, that Ministry of Local Government has no template, has no plan. I remember going to meet the minister when I became chairman. I said, Minister, colleague, and this was Adolf Mwesiga said, what is my expectation? What are the deliverables? He said, Salamu, you can do what you want. And I was in shock. Shock. And this is the mindset that is running local governments. There are no deliverables. There is no support. It's just a conduit of salaries. There's no work. And that is where we miss it. Local government is such a good platform to transform society. But it has no tools. It has no resources.
You see what is interesting, for instance.
So
we're talking
if
about
that
policies.
is a local government and there's the central government, I mean, how can you define that as a fake government? There's no relationship whatsoever.
Doctor,
Yeah, I was just making an addendum to what you're saying. In this whole notion of the challenge in sectoral policy coordination, you find that every year under the Prime Minister's office, there is a national review of implementation of policies. The various ministries. I forget what they call it. I think it's called GARP or something. Yeah. But by nature of all policies, particularly let me single out, for instance, natural resources policies, where you have, biodiversity conservation, forestry conservation, and all these resources, by the way, are right down in the local governments. Yeah. But that particular review is done without invitation of the local governments. Nothing. Then also in these policies, because you see what is a policy, they are basically three things: the purpose, the objectives, and then the guidelines in that particular policy. Now, in any of these policies, you see, they look inwards. They are not outward. Because once it comes to the stage of implementation, where it now needs to go to the local governments, it ceases to speak. I will see there is a biodiversity conservation policy, but as the district environmental officer, how do I align what this policy is saying to, say, for instance, the programs that NEMA is churning out? The district council, does it have an environmental or natural resource committee? What is it saying? In this policy, where do I trace the two elements of legality? That is indigenous rights or community rights. Because remember, for instance, you're talking about land, you're talking about swamps. Swamps are embedded within pieces of land. Yes.
Where the people live.
Yes. So this deep in Pakwach there, I know this was my grandfather's territory. I have individual rights being part of that clan. The other clan members have community rights that they derive. Now, you are legislating over this piece of land. But when it comes to execution, it is at individual level. When you look for the sanctions, you simply say, when you degrade whatever, when you define, now you're defining the swamp at our home as maybe class A or class B, which is supposed to be protected. That has never been communicated to me as the individual. That never gets communicated to the district environmental officer. That never gets communicated to the chief district officer, who is actually by the LC5. So are you seeing that distortion? So at the end of the day, you have a beautiful piece of document, but me, I will continue once the dictates of the time indicate that I should do rice with the persistent drought. I'm simply going to open up the swamp. And there is every little swamp everywhere. And like Salamu said, there's no dashboard anywhere. So by the time you're waking up to go and see the swamps in Amwenda, they have been degraded for the last 10 years. Yeah. So sometimes you're coming too late for action.
Honorable, as we conclude, what can you tell the Ugandan taxpayer watching us, who is bearing the brunt of fiscal indiscipline by the government?
You see, the Ugandan doesn't know that they're taxpayers. The disconnect is so terrible. They don't know that they do not know that they are being deprived of service. They do not have schools. They do not have health facilities.
But Honorable Salamu, how can you say that? The president was very clear the other day.
Yeah.
He said for you to get services, he just said here in Kawempe the other day, that for you to get services that have seen you don't have services. Yeah. For you to get services, you vote the NRM party.
But I'll give you an example. Kamuli is all NRM. Yeah. All. And it is described as the poorest district. in the country.
How
is that?
All MPs from Karamoja are
NRM.
NRM. Karamoja is the poorest.
Yes, and we are second.
So I don't see the logic
in
there.
So we must help the community understand that this empty talk is like a rodent that keeps biting you and also soothing you. So this rodent of a government of NRM is so parasitic to the extent that why radios are being attacked and journalists being, because the critical questions must not be allowed to filter down to the people. The people think that it is bad luck that they are poor. They do not make the connection that government is stealing from them. It's taking money from their pockets every day without putting back anything. Because what is the biggest family expenditure? It is health. You cannot go to a health facility without money. So you must sell your harvest of 10 bags of maize to go and treat malaria. And what will you be left with? Nothing. In between, the PSCs and the workers in Ministry of Health are coming to visit you for burial with all these big guzzlers. Okay? They have taken your money. And so when the people are helped to make that connection that government is stealing from them, the people in Kampala are stealing from them, civil servants are stealing from them, their workers are stealing from them, then the transformation that we are looking for won't happen. What takes money from a family in the rural area? It's education. And who is stealing from education? It's the government. If we had a serious committees, they would try to understand why your NEB money registration is more than the fees under UPE. And who takes that money? You mean the Ministry of Education does not plan for examinations, that we have to make a separate provision for it at family level? That money is stolen from them because nobody is doing an in-depth analysis and coordination of how money is being lost at family level. And once we are able to communicate this, only that the citizen is happily a subject. They think these things are too far away from them, and so they have gone into the beggar mindset. And funerals are the biggest exhibition of this. You can imagine politicians think that what has replaced public discourse is a burial ceremony. And they're on the lookout, on the hunt for graves, for burial. That's where all the big statements are made. And you know, even families have been degraded to the level that they forget about the dead and look for money from the politicians.
Yes.
Logo Chemonges, the former Prime Minister of Britain, Margaret Thatcher, famously remarked that there is no such thing as public money or funds. It's taxpayers' money. Yeah. What have you got to tell the Ugandan taxpayers we conclude the program?
I think that it starts, it never goes wrong. It starts wrong. And we've started wrong in many programs, many projects. The same thing with the Umeme deal. It started wrong. It did go wrong. Same thing with many of these programs that we are implementing in the country. And so and where again it starts wrong is in the governance question, where we've got it wrong, and we are likely to take a very drastic. Already we are in that direction, but we may take the extreme. And so there is need for each and every one of us to take interest in participating and getting involved in matters of this country.
Thank you, Tim, for sharing your views. Professor.
My concluding remarks are like this. I don't know whether the audience they are getting this concept is that unless Ugandans realized that they need to move away from being subjects and become citizens. The difference between the two is that a subject is the one who has given up and waits for funeral rites as the only space where to talk from. But a citizen is the one who is interested in how he or she is governed and how his tax is used for the benefit of the common good. So we have spaces that we have abandoned or the government has refused to open them for us. There is a holding house for policies called the Cabinet Secretariat. The Cabinet Secretariat is where all policies pass through, and the Cabinet Secretariat has got even rules and guidelines as to how a policy should be passed and become a government policy. And one of the guidelines, or many of the guidelines, are saying that there should be alternatives given and there should be citizen participation of all walks of life. That one is never implemented because we have just decided, the government has decided to push us to be subjects, and we have also accepted to be subjects and not
important
citizens.
ones.
And not citizens. Once you are important, then you are a subject.
Very important ones.
So they are castrating us. We need to be citizens. You can imagine, as the colleagues have been pointing out, the only space now we have been left with to talk about government policies is a funeral. You wait for a funeral right to speak about policies. I saw that happening in Kasese and the Toro there, when the unfortunate happened to the minister. I think he was shot dead. This minister was shot dead. People at that funeral right actually expressed their anger. How such a people who are marginalized end up making mistakes like that soldier made. So the people are now waiting for the funerals. That is the space we are left with. Even the physical spaces have been taken away from us.
Which means we are
You
dead.
go to Makerere University, the Freedom Square is no longer a Freedom Square. It has been barricaded with metals. The Kororo is barricaded. Nambore is barricaded. Nachivo is barricaded. People no longer have spaces where to participate. We wait for funeral rites to express ourselves. I think we could do better and reverse the trend.
Thank you, Professor, for your viewpoints. Doctor, how do we become citizens once again?
For me, I would rather, particularly in the parliament, even if you were not going to agree on something, but allow it to be debated.
Correct.
Just for the purpose, you see, just that debate alone. And I really want to speak to the NRM people and the NRM sycophants. I really want them to know that that element of debate, even if the proposal was bogus, at least it refines it. Let us take simple images. Look, we keep saying there was no science, but there has always been science, indigenous science amongst our people. In the north where I come from, we have a lot of simsim. So simsim, millet. You see the process of winnowing.
Yeah.
Today you see very sophisticated machines, but we used to use what they call odero. And even then there were expert, or what you call it? Yes, skilled, the woman weaves the thing as with the child in the back and she's singing. And at the end of the day, when the meal comes to the table,
Smelled with love.
Yes, it is refined. It's fresh millet. No
Clean.
Stones, no. So
Distoned.
the ladies and gentlemen in the August house,
Parent identification, not cadre identification.
how do you feel? How do they feel?
And deployment.
They have children. How do you walk to your children and sit with them every day and say, I'm actually an honorable? They hear you're being called honorable member of parliament. And then the scorecard comes and they say you spoke twice. to listen to any of them trying. Let them try. Let them try to speak. So my point is that citizens, we really need, the dog is in town, and I think we need to recapture the town. These spaces for conversation need to be increased. Just like we speak in the studio here, I think particularly the intelligentsia. There is a lot of people have committed class suicide. I'm afraid these days, this is an election year. I didn't care about the color yellow. I really, not that I liked it, but I'm even afraid of opening my phone these days, because every little brat who is because first of all, there is this false belief that politics is now a panacea to everything, poverty. to poverty. You see, every little poster you see, the deep background is yellow. I have no problem with that. But the question to ask, do you really want it yellow? Why should it be yellow? I think we need to have a discussion around this. I don't think anybody should bulldoze us to believe that if it is yellow, it is good.
It is ripe.
It is ripe. It is the correct line. Just like we have said. I mean, we have interrogated the indicators, the possible indicators of sustainability. And we've seen that they are not working. So what is this that yellow is selling to us? We cannot sustain ourselves after 3 months. The school syllabus we are having is crooked. The graduates we are producing today, so we are
producing brats.
We are off the tangent, and it's time to revisit this as countrymen. So it takes you back to the debate of Plato, Aristotle, during the time of the Republican. I think we really need to get there.
Interesting views. I must appreciate you, Dr. Tolit, Mr. Timothy Chemonges, Honorable Salamu, Musumba, and Professor Mwambustya Ndebesa for your able participation on today's edition of Focus on Parliament. Many thanks to our esteemed viewers for your time and for watching. Many thanks to the production unit for keeping us live on air. Our esteemed viewers, please engage us on our various social media platforms. We are on X, we are on Facebook. You can watch this program on our YouTube channel and also subscribe. We'll see you next time. Be blessed.